So yeah, thanks for having me here. My name's Fred Hornaday. I work with my company Planboo as a bamboo consultant. I've been in the bamboo business for many years, a couple decades now. And I also work with a company called Planboo, and we work with biochar projects all around the world, helping them to earn carbon credits for producing biochar and turning their agricultural waste into biochar, improving their soil, capturing carbon, and financing those projects through carbon credit revenues. And so today I want to talk to you about specifically biochar for salty soils, as you know, is the topic of the day. So I'm going to start with a brief overview of what is biochar, how it's made, and why it's important. And then we're going to get into some scientific deep dive into the science of biochar, specifically for improving saline soils. And then if there's time, I know we're a little bit short on time, I can talk about biochar and carbon credits, but we'll be focusing on the first two topics, I think, given the time restraints. So biochar, I assume most of you are familiar with what biochar is. Basically, it is a form of charcoal, plant-based, carbon-rich charcoal, typically used as a soil amendment. There's many other applications of biochar in construction, for example, in concrete and different industrial uses. But we're going to be focusing on the use of biochar as a soil amendment. And that's what the projects we work with at Planboo are all based on adding the biochar to the soil to improve crop yields and soil fertility. And this is a project in the picture here that we work with in Thailand, making biochar from bamboo offcuts, bamboo waste, basically. So the feedstock for making biochar can be any organic material, wood or even sewer sludge, crop waste. The projects we work with really focus on waste products. So rather than going and sourcing organic material out of a forest or something like that, we're using waste products. In this case, it's bamboo waste from bamboo production facilities where they are selecting poles and cutting them down to sizes, and then they end up with all these little odd bits and pieces. And before the biochar project was initiated, this waste would just be left aside on the side of the field to rot, or more often they would actually burn it in a big pile at the end of the day in an open fire. So either of those processes, either just rotting and decomposing or being burnt in an open fire, either of those results in huge greenhouse gas emissions, CO2, methane, et cetera, going up into the air. So the great thing about biochar is that one of the first important things is that it's able to prevent that uncontrolled decomposition and release of gases into the air. And the organic material and the carbon is locked into a stable state in the biochar rather than being released into the atmosphere as it decomposes. Biochar from woody biomass is our preferred feedstock. So bamboo, for example, or it could be offcuts or waste from forestry. Cotton plants are very woody. The waste from cotton farming, it's about 70 to 80% carbon. And so that carbon is super beneficial in the soil, which we'll get into more in a little bit. It's also important to understand that if you're adding too much carbon to the soil has a natural tendency to find an equilibrium of carbon and nitrogen. So it's really important to be mixing some nitrogen with the biochar. So manure or compost are usually what's mixed with the biochar to produce a super healthy soil additive. Otherwise, if you're just adding pure biochar, you don't get the benefits, not right away, at least. Over time, the biochar breaks down and you see those benefits, but for more immediate results, it's really important to mix some compost or manure with the biochar. Here's the life cycle of biochar in a nutshell. We start out at the top with, we have some bamboo in the picture here. I'm a big bamboo supporter, as I mentioned. Happy World Bamboo Day, by the way. Today is September 18th, World Bamboo Day. So you start out with vigorous vegetative growth. So the plants are growing, bamboos or trees or other crops. As they grow, they're absorbing CO2 as part of the process of photosynthesis. The biomass absorbs the CO2 in the stalks and the roots and the leaves of the plant. Then the plants are harvested, and the byproducts, what's left over, what's not used for building or for eating or whatever it is, what's not used ends up getting burned, like I said, or cast aside to the side of the field to rot and decompose. So to prevent that from happening, biochar is produced through the process of pyrolysis. Same process, basically, that you make charcoal. It's a bit higher temperature than charcoal production, so you end up with basically it's a higher quality charcoal. And in this process, the impurities are burned off, and you have a very pure, almost pure carbon, about 70 to 80% carbon. So instead of that being released in the atmosphere, it's stabilized and fixed in a solid state in the biochar. And then that biochar goes into the soil, where you create a carbon sink. The carbon stays in the soil for hundreds of years, if not 1,000 or more years. And in the process of that, you're increasing the fertility of the soil and all kinds of other benefits that we're about to get into. So soil salinity is a global crisis. I'm sure you guys have already, we've gone over this already in previous presentations, but it affects about 20% of cultivated and 33% of irrigated land for food production. And it can be caused by various natural or human activities. I think you guys already know about that. So we'll skip straight to the benefits of biochar for saline soils. One of the key things is the improvement of the soil organic carbon levels. So because there's so much carbon, like I said, 70 to 80%, if it's a woody biomass feedstock, you're improving that soil organic carbon, which is really important nutrients for the plants. Like I said, it's really important also to inoculate or mix that biochar with compost or manure to get the nitrogen as well, which is equally important. But the biochar has a way of holding nitrogen and other nutrients in the soil because of its porosity and its absorbency. It improves the soil density. So because of the low density of biochar, it's light and fluffy. It breaks up the soil to improve soil drainage, which we've talked about already, or another presentation mentioned the importance of soil drainage for saline soils. The surface area of biochar is one of the most impressive characteristics. I believe they say in 1 gram of biochar, if you stretch it out, the surface area would cover about the size of a football field because of all these little tiny pores and nooks and crannies. So that porosity, that surface area is really crucial for retaining microorganisms and retaining moisture, so reducing the need for fertilizers and irrigation. The cation exchange capacity. This is something I don't hear people talk about too often unless it's in the context of biochar, but it's a super important aspect of soil science, soil chemistry, what's going on at a molecular level in the soil, and biochar is super important for that. And we'll get into that in more detail in a second. And it also increases the pH, so reducing the acidity of the soil, which is an important thing with saline soils. Salty soils in arid climates tend to be more acidic. So the biochar is really good for that as well. So let's take a little closer look at how biochar can improve the soil structure on a more molecular level here. So like I said before, biochar improves the density, loosens the clay soil, also improves the drainage in really salty soil, sandy soil. because of the porosity of the biochar and the density. Those are the key factors which contribute to improving nutrient uptake, water retention, and biodiversity. The biodiversity on like a microorganism level in the soil, which is super important for soil health. And studies show that the porosity of salt-affected soils was, on average, increased by close to 9%, while the bulk density usually decreased by about 6% after adding biochar. So then the cation exchange capacity, which I mentioned, is a super important one. It's an important measure of soil fertility. And basically, we're talking about the interaction, the bonding of positive ions and negative ions. Positive and negative soil particles bonding, which improves nutrient uptake, and especially calcium and magnesium are stored at a higher level. When you have this happening, it also prevents the excessive accumulation of sodium, which is a serious problem in salty soils, and decreasing the sodium availability while increasing potassium and the potassium to sodium ratio. So it's obviously very high sodium levels if you're talking about saline soils. And so this cation exchange capacity is really important for improving that. Basically, what happens with the CEC, cation exchange capacity, is you have negative surface charge on the biochar, which mitigates the negative effects of the salt stress from from the sodium. And there's it's a nice picture close up of the biochar there. You can see the pores and that surface area, which are just excellent for harboring microorganisms, or retaining moisture, retaining nutrients. Beautiful stuff. So improving the macrobiome and the microbiome and the macrobiome. So like I said, the binding of soil particles with the biochar is very important on a molecular level, elevating the soil aggregate stability at this molecular level, and just overall increase in the presence of microorganisms, which improve the soil health and the nutrient availability, particularly of nitrogen and phosphorus. And then at the same time, improving root development and fungal growth. So not only the microorganisms, but also organisms slightly larger size, the fungus and other soil particles. So really improving just everything that's going on in that soil, the rhizosphere. And another benefit is the stimulation of root exudates. So the roots of the plant, not only are they absorbing nutrients and water, of course, but they're also secreting certain substances which add to the health of the soil and the buildup of organic matter. And so that's directly related to an increase in nutrient availability by improving this rhizosphere, because of the cation exchange capacity and also the lower bulk density of the soil. And water retention is a super important benefit of biochar on any degraded soil or salty soils. And this is one of the biggest issues with high saline soil, because it tends to correlate with arid climates where there's not as much water, or not as much clean fresh water. And then the bulk density, the porosity and surface area of the biochar, and the improved increase in soil aggregates, just all of that combines to improve the water retention overall in the soil. It's the use of biochar it's been around for thousands of years, but it's recently making headlines again as a great solution. It's a bit difficult to find really good studies on specific applications of biochar, but there are a few studies on biochar for saline soils. And one of the project that we're working with in Thailand with the bamboo offcuts in those pictures earlier, they're actually conducting some research with a university in Thailand on salty soils using their bamboo biochar on salty soils for rice cultivation. And that research is still underway, but we also had some reference, some other research that they're using in conjunction with their ongoing project. And the findings on that are really, really positive. As far as rice plants being planted in high saline soil, the survival rate did not change a whole lot with biochar addition in the soil. The survival rate on new plants remained somewhere between 50 to 60%. But there was a huge difference when it was used where the plants were being irrigated from salty water for if there was a saltwater intrusion from close by seawater that was coming in and irrigating the plants, that would result in something like a 5% survival rate of the plants. But with the addition of biochar, the survival rate went from 5% up to about 50%. So a huge improvement there. And it also demonstrated a significant increase in the height and weight of the rice stalks. And these differences weren't so noticeable if it was only about 10% biochar added, but with 20 to 30% biochar added into the soil, that's where we saw the greatest benefits, the best improvement. And there's kind of a saturation point with biochar. If you start adding more than 30%, you kind of have the benefits taper off, and you get, like I said, too much carbon in the soil, and you need to make sure there's a balance there of biochar along with other organic material and other nitrogen-rich substances like manure and compost. I could talk at length. I don't know what the time is like. I could talk at great length about how we generate carbon credits on these biochar projects. But just very briefly, there's a lot of different types of carbon credit projects out there. Most people are familiar with projects related to forestation, planting trees, and then using trees as a carbon sink, absorbing CO2 through photosynthesis and then storing carbon in the biomass and in the roots and soil under the forest. Biochar is a whole different process. It's actually much easier to measure. You can see what the biochar is, you know how much carbon is in it, and you put it in the ground and you know exactly how much carbon you've put in the ground. And so it's much easier than measuring how much carbon you're absorbing with an acre of forest. We all know that the forest is absorbing CO2, but when it comes to measuring how much it is, and then when there's a monetary factor associated with it, then people are incentivized to exaggerate the numbers and bend the science a little bit. And so there's a lot of fraud and questionable carbon projects with forestation. So one of the things we like about biochar projects is that the transparency and the tangibility of carbon in the biochar for generating credits. There's a number of different registries out there that track biochar projects for carbon credits for carbon removal, including Puro Earth, CSI, Carbon Standards International in Switzerland, and several others. Basically, to get to the nitty gritty, from 1 ton of biochar, you get about 2 tons of CO2 removal. And one ton of CO2 is equal to 1 carbon credit. It's a little bit confusing that 1 ton of biochar has 2 tons of CO2. That's because the ton of biochar, we're talking about carbon, solid carbon, and CO2, we're talking about a gas. And so there's when you add oxygen to the carbon, you end up with a lot more CO2. But basically it's more or less 2 tons per ton of biochar, and that depends because Depends on the carbon percentage of the biochar. It also depends on other emissions in the project. If there's a lot of emissions from transportation or the use of power tools, then that is calculated in to the calculation of the carbon credits. And so we might reduce the tons of CO2 down to 1.8 or something like that. And then for 1 ton of CO2 for a carbon credit, CDRC is a carbon dioxide removal credit. The market price is somewhere between $100 to $200. And so that's a significant source of income for these projects, especially in the tropics, where there's not a great value for biochar, not a great monetary value. It's hard to sell biochar in Zambia or Malawi or Ghana. And so most of our projects that we work with at Planboo, they rely entirely on the carbon credit revenue to finance the project. And then basically they end up getting a lot of free biochar, which they can add to their plantations, any number of different crops they can add it to, and to reap all those benefits that we talked about earlier. And yeah, if you want to know more, feel free to reach out. My email is down here, I think. Oh, my email's not there, but you can find me on LinkedIn really easily. That's the best way, or you can Google Planboo or Google Bamboo Batu, and you'll find me. And I always enjoy talking about biochar and bamboo. So thanks for your time, and hope you learned something from that.